Welcome to American Diplomacy at Risk. In this series, we're looking at the current state of American diplomacy, the risks posed to that diplomacy, how important this diplomacy is for the American people, and what you can do about it. In this session, we're going to look at the importance of consular work overseas. Consular work is really the first line of defense for America. It's also work that supports Americans traveling and living abroad. It helps many, many thousands of Americans every month, and over the longer term, supports and plays a key role in our system for the important travel and visitation that takes place to the United States. Thank you for being with us. Welcome to American Diplomacy at Risk. In this session, we're talking about the importance of consular work overseas for American citizens and for the United States. We're very fortunate to have with us Ambassador Janice Jacobs. Janice, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your career.
Oh, thank you very much, Tony. It's really a pleasure for me to be here and to have an opportunity to talk about consular work and how it fits in with overall U.S. government diplomatic efforts. I have 35 years with the State Department. I actually retired twice, the first time in 2014 from my job as Assistant Secretary for Consular Affairs. I was called back into the service the following year and served for about a year and a half as Transparency Coordinator. I actually have experienced the Foreign Service from many different angles. I'm a Foreign Service brat, which means my father was a Foreign Service officer. He was with USAID for over 20 years. I was a Foreign Service spouse for many years and actually began my State Department career as a spouse. And then I came in myself in 1980. And I actually served in many different assignments and roles, about equally in overseas and also in Washington. Most of my overseas experience was in either Africa, where my last assignment was as ambassador to Senegal and Guinea-Bissau, and also in Latin America. I have two adult sons who were born and raised in the Foreign Service, and one of them is now a third-generation Foreign Service officer serving at our embassy in Mexico City.
Well, congratulations. Now, usually people don't think about consular work when they think about diplomacy. So tell us a little bit about that work and how it really is part of American diplomacy.
Oh, absolutely. Consular work actually is the most direct kind of diplomacy. And by that I mean that consular officers touch lives every day, and they also affect the security of the United States. Consular work is all about protecting American citizens overseas and also protecting our borders through the careful adjudication of both visas and U.S. passports. And what's really interesting is that consular issues often become hot topics. They're often in the news, whether it's keeping terrorists out of the United States or deciding how to handle individuals who are in the country without proper legal status. And while those policy decisions will be decided by Congress, the White House, ultimately the American people, all of the answers, the solutions to those problems will have resource implications for the State Department and for consular sections overseas. But consular diplomacy, more than anything, is about how consular customers are treated. Oftentimes, the experiences that people have in our consular sections will affect their entire view of the State Department.
So they're really public diplomacy officers also, in that they're shaping the public's view of the United States.
That is absolutely right. It's not just what consular officers do, but how they do it. About 95% of people going to an embassy or a consulate overseas are there for a consular service. And while consular officers are taught to treat everyone who comes in for a service, whether it's an American citizen or a visa applicant, it's very, very important that people are treated with great respect. Even if a visa, for example, is refused, the officer has to be able to explain that denial in a way that allows the visa applicant to keep his or her dignity intact. And so, as I said, it's really not just what we do, but how we do it. And if we are in the business of good customer service, we're doing a good job. But if we are treating visa applicants rudely, we are very apt to get an angry call from the host government's foreign ministry, or it can actually affect how people view the State Department back here in the United States. So it is very, very important for consular officers to understand the important role that they play in supporting not just diplomacy, but public diplomacy. Consular officers play a huge role in presenting a positive image of the United States.
And if I understand, in visa work, there are really two important sides of that. On the one side, there's the security question. You don't want to let the wrong people in. On the other side, you want to let good people in, and that has big economic benefit for the United States. Say a little bit about that.
No, that is absolutely true. Visa adjudication, of course, is one of the key functions that consular officers carry out. And it is absolutely true that they have dual responsibilities when doing so. They are there to serve as the first line of defense to protect U.S. borders, but at the same time, they are there to facilitate legitimate travel to the United States, and that is very, very important for our economic security, which I'll explain in just a second. Consular officers, when they're doing visas, have to be very careful about screening visa applicants, and we do that in very close coordination with the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, and other agencies who help us with that screening. In fact, we have a very close partnership with the Department of Homeland Security. They actually play a role in setting visa policies, so very important for us to have a good working relationship with that agency. As I said, though, we do have another responsibility, and that is to facilitate legitimate travel. And let me give you just an idea about some of the numbers involved with that. The most recent statistics published by the Bureau of Consular Affairs show that about, in 1 year, 13 million non-immigrant visa applications were adjudicated. Non-immigrant visas are temporary visas, such as for tourists or for students, for temporary workers. Of those 13 million, 10 million were issued. And according to the Department of Commerce, there were about 75.6 million international visitors to the United States in calendar year 26. And those visitors actually contributed $245 billion with a B, dollars, to the U.S. economy, while supporting about 1.2 million jobs that generated about $33 billion in wages. So as you can see, consular work is important regarding border security, but it's equally important for the economic security of the United States. And let me just add that international students, a lot of people don't realize, also are a huge factor when we talk about economic growth here in the United States. Of course, we encourage international students. In the academic year 2015 through 2016, we had over 1 million students at various learning institutions across the country. They contributed around $33 billion to the economy and supported 400,000 jobs. So it really is important that the United States get the word out that our welcome mat is still out for international visitors.
Well, thank you very much for explaining the big security and the important economic role that consular officers play. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Welcome to American Diplomacy at Risk. In this session, we're talking about the importance of consular work overseas by American diplomats who help protect our country and help American citizens. we're very fortunate to have with us Ambassador Michelle Bond. Michelle, can you tell us about your career?
I'd be happy to. It's a pleasure to be here on the program with you. I first learned about the Foreign Service because my mother worked at the State Department during the Nixon administration. And at that time I was still in high school, and she talked about the Foreign Service officers that she worked with and how impressed she was by the variety of things that they had done and their ability to work effectively together in different sorts of situations. She said, these are smart, fun people, they're great to work with, and I think you'd be good at this. So I worked for the department during the summers while I was in college. The first time I worked on a crisis involving Americans overseas was the invasion of Cyprus in 1974, when I was still in my teens. And I think the people that I was on the phone with giving advice to would have been shocked if they'd known that they were talking to someone who was still in her teens. But a few years later, I joined the Foreign Service. I served for 40 years, and I loved every day of it. I had a number of tours in Europe, including in countries like Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia that have since split up. And because I was married to a Foreign Service officer, we served together most of the time, and we raised our 4 children in the Foreign Service.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned crises. A lot of people don't think about it, but consular officers play a tremendously important job in helping people overseas when there is a crisis, either a massive crisis or a personal crisis. Could you talk a little bit about those cases?
That's exactly right. When you have something that's, say, a family-sized crisis, for example, someone who's injured in a car accident or is a victim of crime or is arrested and charged with a crime or may even die overseas, it's usually the staff in the consular section that respond to the needs of that person and also the family members who may be back in the States or even in a third country. So our job then is to step in and provide the assistance that the individual and the family needs for them to understand what are the legal requirements in this country if you've just been arrested. What are the resources that are available if you are a victim of domestic violence? We would be the ones who would be able to refer a person to a safe place to be if going home is not going to be a safe thing to do. So we have the training and the resources to deal very directly, often face to face, with people who may be going through some of the worst experiences of their lives. We have the information that they need to make good decisions about what the next steps should be for them. So I'll give you an example. When I was serving in Czechoslovakia, I traveled one time to visit a young American who had been arrested in Slovakia and was serving a 6-month prison term for theft. We didn't hear about his case at the time he was arrested, so by the time I met him, he was already in prison, and he was doing pretty well. He spoke some Slovak, and he was in good health. He didn't have any urgent needs. So what was interesting about this case was that literally no one at that prison had ever met an American official before. So I was going to be their impression of what the United States is all about and how we deal with our citizens and with other countries. So I met with him for a while and then talked to the prison director, who was prickly when I first came in. And I think he had probably seen movies where the American official starts ordering people around. So I said, you know, it seems to me that this is not a bad young man. He made a mistake and he's paying for it, but I think that he's basically a pretty good person, and I hope that he's been a good prisoner, and he agreed that he had been. And I said, you know, the one thing he mentioned is that there are some prisoners here who are sent out every day to do work. They're cutting grass along the highway or doing different kinds of jobs like that. He would love to have the opportunity to do that instead of just sitting inside all day. So if that were possible, that would be a good thing for him while he serves his sentence. And indeed, within a few days after I left, we learned that that change had been made and he was doing it. So as I think back on that not a big incident, but think about the impression that was made on the director of the prison and the other officials that I met and the other prisoners who were serving with this young man. They even talked about it while I was there, that someone had come all the way from Prague to a fairly remote part of Czechoslovakia to see this young man, to make sure he was okay, to look out for his interests. One of the guards there said, "I'm not sure that my country would do this for me." And that's a good way to show the type of country that we are, that we try to look out for every citizen. Now, of course, there are also massive crises that we are responding to sometimes, like terrorist attacks, which are unfortunately rather frequent, and also plane crashes and other incidents where many individuals are involved. And one of the first challenges is to try to find out if there are American citizens who are among the people who are victims, and who are they and what is their situation. This is especially challenging now because people expect very rapid information. They expect us to be able to say quickly, you know, your son Jack is okay. And it may take time before we know whether Jack was even anywhere in the vicinity of an incident. One of the things that we do is we put out the word that people should send messages home or post on Facebook to say they're okay. I used to say we want American citizens to call their mom before she calls us, because of course the people at home are going to be worried, oh my goodness, my husband is in that place and is he okay? So through good communication and good coordination with our colleagues at Post and back in the States, we can get the information out that people need.
So when I was ambassador to Mexico, we had a large storm that hit Los Cabos, stranding tens of thousands of Americans and Mexicans and others. Right. And the consular section was in the lead, and the consular section back in Washington set up a task force to work on this, and they coordinated with the Defense Department to find all those people, to help them get connected with airplanes to get home.
That's right.
So it can really be massive sometimes.
It is.
In the help that you all offer.
And it's a 24/7 operation.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for sharing that story with us, Michelle.
You're welcome.
Welcome back to American Diplomacy at Risk. In this session, we're exploring the importance of consular work overseas for U.S. citizens and for the United States. Janice, could you talk a little bit about what we need to meet the consular challenges in this century?
Thank you for that question, and happy to answer. I think overall the biggest challenge is going to be to continue providing the highest level service possible to customers, to our customers, be they American citizens overseas or visa applicants. And so we need the resources, we need the tools in order to do that. I think from a visa perspective, it's going to be very important for us to continue to find effective ways to screen applicants, to assure the U.S. public that we are in fact protecting borders. And what that is going to require is a constant dialogue and exchange between the State Department and other border security and national security agencies to make sure that we are sharing all of the information that we have on known or suspected terrorists or others who might try to do us harm. That also includes overseas countries. We need the information, the data that they have as well. We all need to be talking to one another and sharing that information so that we can properly screen our visa applicants. I think it's also extremely important to have the most modern technologies available so that we can make maximum use of biometrics, so that we do have that ability to share data and information electronically. And I think one of the other important things, not just for the consular service, for the Department of State at large, is that we need to be sure that we continue to attract the best people and keep the best people to do foreign service work. And I'd like to mention here that the Bureau of Consular Affairs for a number of years has made a special effort to train and to develop future leaders of the State Department. All new incoming officers have to perform a consular tour, and so the Bureau of Consular Affairs wants to be sure that that experience is a good one, and that we're giving new officers the tools, the training, the skills that they need to succeed across their entire career. So a set of leadership and management principles or tenets have been developed that have really become part of the culture of consular affairs. Things like communicate effectively, model integrity, communicate down and up and across the organization. All of those very basic ideas about what makes a good leader or a good manager. And I'm really proud to say that the State Department has now adopted many of those tenets, those principles, for use across the entire State Department.
Well, of course, it's important for people to understand that most incoming State Department officers who go on to serve in different kind of jobs spend their first years in the consular section of an embassy overseas. And so you're really giving them initial management training, which is very important. And I saw all the work that your colleagues were doing in Mexico when I was there as ambassador to improve the processes. And they did a tremendous job of speeding up and making it easier for people to give us the information we need to get their visa. But what other things are needed, Michelle, as we go forward in this century? We have more people wanting to travel to the United States. We have those serious threats from radicals of various types that are out there. What else do we need?
You know, I think an important point to keep in mind is when we talk about speeding up the process, we don't mean we want to be in such a hurry that we're not taking the time we need to look at each candidate carefully. But it is possible to communicate with people in ways that make the whole process more efficient. For example, in the olden days when we couldn't communicate with people as easily, people would just show up at 7 o'clock in the morning and line up outside and wait to come in, and when we had as many in as we could handle, we sent the rest of them home. Now people come in with appointments, and now we have ways through the internet to give them very clear instructions on what they need to bring with them. If you're going to register the birth of your American child, what exactly do you have to bring with you? We consider it to be a process foul if someone has to come back a second time because there was something they didn't know to bring with them the first time they came. We don't want to waste people's time, and we don't want to waste our own time. We want to be able to give really good and efficient service. Nowadays, more than 40% of American citizens have passports, and that's a big increase compared to 15 years ago. And that's a great thing. Americans are traveling. They look at this thing and they say, this is good for 10 years, and they start thinking about the trips they want to take. And what we're seeing is that Americans are traveling not just to traditional places that you might think of, but to far more remote and exotic and places, and that's a good thing too. But it can mean that if they get into difficulties, they are in a place where communication is difficult and getting help to them is difficult. And that's one of our priorities now, is to make sure that we have ways to communicate and respond, to send instructions, to send help, even when people are in places where there's no Wi-Fi or there are other things that interfere with what they're used to using for communication.
So we need to invest resources in our technology as well as in our human capital, as well as in our people.
That's right. It's fundamentally important that we have people serving overseas too. There's a lot you can do remotely to send information and guidance, but you need people who are there on the scene, who can deal directly with local officials, who speak the language, who are able to intervene and make the kinds of decisions that need to be made in a short-term way during a crisis. You can't have just a template and say, this is what you're going to do in a hotel fire, because it's going to depend on what the situation is in each hotel fire. So we have to have people who are trained and experienced and on the ground in these countries. And that's something that shouldn't be cut back in dramatic ways.
We could certainly see that when that big storm hit in Los Cabos. You needed to know the officials to be able to go work with them, and that doesn't come in just a phone call. You had to have already developed that knowledge, and they had to know who you were.
Right.
And that makes a big difference.
It's a matter of building trust and also having a clear sense of what they're going to be doing and how we can work together and build on each other's strengths.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to have two such experienced and accomplished consular officers and ambassadors of the United States with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In this session of American Diplomacy at Risk, we've explored the important role played by consular officers overseas as the first line of defense for America and as the first line of reception and welcome for the 76 million tourists who come to the United States each year and spend some $245 billion. It's a vital role for the welfare and protection of America. This is a strong reminder that we need a strong diplomacy. We need to fund that diplomacy. We need adequate budgets to allow us to facilitate travel, protect Americans, and do all the other important work that diplomats do to open markets, to find solutions to problems. You can make a difference. Call your senator or congressman and urge that American diplomacy be funded well. You can get more information by looking at American Diplomacy at Risk on the World Wide Web, on Facebook, and on Twitter. Thanks for being with us.